Hello, I'm Terry Masherin, Vice President of the Chicago Bar Association, and welcome to the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly. Many of us have heard about Bernie Madoff and his Ponzi scheme. Mr. Madoff defrauded unsuspecting investors out of billions of dollars. How can we protect ourselves against schemes like that? And if you're a victim, what can you do? How can you recover your losses? Here to discuss Ponzi schemes are Tom James, an attorney with the Illinois Attorney General's Office, and Ron Peterson, a partner with Jenner & Block. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, Ron, there was a real man named Mr. Ponzi. What did he do, and why was it so bad that we've named a whole fraudulent scheme after him?
Ponzi came to the United States at the turn of the 20th century. What is strange is that he was a convicted felon. He was sent to Atlanta in 1911 for smuggling illegal immigrants into the United States. At the end of 1919, he came up with a brilliant idea. In those days, instead of getting a self-addressed stamped envelope to return, people sent what was called a return mail coupon. And this came from abroad. You could take the coupon, give it to a U.S. post office, and they'd give you a foreign stamp so you could mail the letter back to Europe or to Asia, or wherever you were sending it. So Ponzi came up with this idea. He came to Tom and he said, Tom, for $1, we can go and send this money to my cousin in Italy. He'll convert it into lira, 62 lira. He'll buy one of these coupons. We'll mail it back to the United States. We can go to the United States Post Office in Boston and get $3.50, a stamp worth that much money. We'll then take the stamp, sell it to Boston businessmen for 90 cents on the dollar, and the rest of the profits are ours. So what he promised these people was that they could make a 50% profit in 45 days or double their money in 90 days. Now, the problem was that when I went to Tom to get the dollar for the stamps, I wasn't selling stamps or getting stamps from Italy. Instead, I would go to you, Terry, and you'd be my next investor along with your next door neighbor on both sides, and I'd use the money from yours to pay off Tom. And of course, Tom is really, really excited, and he'd go and tell all his friends. So what happened here is that once Ponzi started with $5,000 of notes in January of 1920. Once the community found out that Tom and his friends were making these phenomenal profits at your expense, they started investing. And by July of 1920, Ponzi had pyramided this thing out to $7 million. It was then that the Boston Post ran a story which pointed out two very shaky facts. Number one, there were only $185,000 worth of these international postage stamps in circulation. What was Ponzi doing with the money? And number two, the post office would only redeem 10 of these coupons per day. Ponzi would have to stand in line for 150 years to get them all redeemed. And so the whole scandal collapsed. 3 receivers were appointed for Ponzi. One of the cases wound up in the United States Supreme Court, Cunningham versus Brown in 1924. And it was not until 1928 that the people got any dividend at all. They got about 37 cents on the dollar.
And what happened to Mr. Ponzi?
Ponzi was convicted in a federal court of mail fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison, of which he served 3.5 years. After he got out of prison, Terry, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts indicted him for larceny. Ponzi was his own lawyer and tried the case and won. He was acquitted. Commonwealth of Massachusetts re-indicted him for some other charges of larceny. Ponzi tried his own case a second time and got a hung jury. And it wasn't until the third time that the Commonwealth indicted him for yet additional larceny that they got a conviction and sent him to a state penitentiary for 9 years and then ordered him deported to Italy. And he died a broken man, blind, in, I think, 1949 in Brazil.
Okay. And I see you brought a little demonstrative aid for us today. Who's that?
This is Charles Ponzi, and he's here to sell something for you.
Now, a Ponzi scheme is generally defined, as I understand it, Tom, as any scam that pays early investors from later investments. What does that mean, and how do these schemes work?
I think the easiest way to conceptualize it is as a pyramid. In fact, the other term that's frequently used for Ponzi schemes are pyramid schemes. And essentially, the pyramid is composed of the first investor at the top and the second, third, and fourth investor in the next row, and so on as you build the pyramid. Usually, the pyramid has a scheme that sounds too good to be true. There's an investment promise. These are usually considered securities violations. So you're selling a chance at an investment, and usually there is no real profit-making enterprise that's viable.
It's all fake?
It's usually all fake, or it has just enough ring of truth to fascinate people. And of course, because the pyramid is based on the ability to pay people at the top from investments by people in the next rung, at some point the pyramid grows to such proportions it becomes completely unstable, impossible to feed itself. Oftentimes because they become so large, so fast, it's simply physically impossible for the ringleaders to keep up with it. So there are animals that get completely out of control very quickly.
And how are these schemes usually kind of marketed or promoted? Where do you see them come up? Ron?
Well, they come in all different shapes and flavors. Madoff actually operated a brokerage under the Small Investors Protection Corporation Act, and he was doing equity, and he was really preying to wealthy individuals, and he was preying to charities. Whereas the Pedders Ponzi scheme in Minnesota started out with wealthy individuals, but then morphed into what we call lending hedge funds. People find out about these things often by word of mouth, I suspect in the future by the internet, and the animal factor, the greed takes over, and people say, you know, I'm only getting 6% interest at the bank, I can make 15% with Pedders or 25% with Madoff, and all of a sudden there's a herd mentality going. We sat in the Lancelot case where I'm the trustee and interviewed these investors because we wanted to know the diligence they did and how was the fraud being perpetrated. Why did you invest? Well, because Tom did, and he's a smart guy. And by the way, Madoff has paid 15% on this equity investment every year since 1995, forgetting, Terry, that there is a business cycle, and sometimes you should make more than 15%, and sometimes you should make a lot less. But that didn't seem to bother anybody. They looked at this set return and figured this was like money in the bank.
Now, how did Madoff's scheme work? We've read so much about him in the press.
The Madoff scheme was essentially like a hedge fund. People would invest in this, and he told them that he would turn around and invest in the market for them as if he were an investment advisor, and promised them these returns. Pedders was far different. Pedders told the investors, I'm importing television sets, and if you lend me money, I will pay that to the importer. I will then sell it on a guaranteed contract, this TV, to a big box retailer, and I will pay you 15% interest per annum, and I will make some money because I can sell it to the big box far more, get far more money than the importer charged me. And if you were to believe the Pedders scheme, at $3.5 billion, Pedders imported every television set that we watch in the United States from 1995 to 2009.
Now, Tom, these are high-profile cases. Mr. Pedders, I know, is in trial right now up in Minneapolis as we tape this show. Mr. Madoff, of course, is serving, I haven't seen on Letterman recently, but several hundreds of years in jail. Are these schemes unique? Do they come up other times, and do they happen here in Illinois?
Oh, yes. In fact, I think most of our viewers have probably been approached on a Ponzi scheme of some sort or another. There's a very famous one, I think, that may still be active in some states, which I think is called the Birthday Club, where people are invited to celebrate their birthday eventually, and they're to bring a $100 gift to someone else's birthday. And as the calendar moves along, people are added to the list of birthday presenters and people who have birthdays.